Hello and welcome to Shattered Lives, Reach Ireland's crime podcast. My name is Paul Healy and I'm joined as always by Michael O'Toole. How's it going, Mick?
Hey Paul, how's things?
Good. This is our second podcast back this year, and we put a video out there over the course of the week asking for people's ideas, and we've got quite a few ideas and questions coming in, so we're collating all of that. We want to start, as we always do on this podcast, whenever there is another homicide investigation, and sadly there is another one in Waterford. So Mick, you were across that.
Yes, a lady. There's a murder investigation into the death of a lady called Gillian Curran, who was 47. She was living in Waterford, and her body was found on Saturday. She was originally from Tramore, and she was working I think it was a charity. She worked for a resource centre in Waterford, very well known in Tramore and in Waterford. Anyway, obviously a man has been charged, so we're limited as to what we can say, but the man who has been charged with her murder is a man called Marcus O'Neill, who is 34, from O'Brien Street in Waterford City. He appeared in court charged with her murder on Sunday, and the court heard he made no reply when the charge was put to him. Now, Paul, you'll know, we might explain this to our listeners, bail is not a matter for the district court when someone is charged with murder. So Mr. O'Neill is currently in custody and he has been remanded.
And we obviously are limited in what we can say in regards to that because it is before the courts. But this is the fourth homicide now this year.
Yes, and if you remember last week, we were talking about it's effectively one a week. So I think we're in the fourth. Are we in the fourth? We're at the end of the month. It's 4 weeks, basically. So, yeah, and interestingly, the four homicides, we call them homicides, I've explained why. 4 homicides all took place in the Republic. There haven't been any in Northern Ireland yet. But of the 4 homicides, 3 are women and 1 is a man. And I think charges have been laid on all of them.
Interesting. The next topic we want to talk about is Gareth Hutch, the murder of Gareth Hutch. Obviously, we probably have referred to this in the past numerous times. There have been multiple people charged, 4 people now convicted of the murder of Gareth Hutch in May 2016. And I suppose this is the last real big case connected that's actively been going on for a number of years in relation to the Kinahan Hutch feud. So it was significant. I was there myself at the Special Criminal Court on Monday, watching Thomas Nicky McConnell, as he's known, be jailed for life, as is the mandatory sentence for murder. Obviously, it was before the Special Criminal Court, so the 3 judges of the Special Criminal Court, led by Judge Alexander Owens. People might remember that name from the Conor McGregor civil case, same judge. And yeah, look, I mean, it was shortened to the point once the victim impact statement was read out of Vera Hutch, Gareth's mother, because the only sentence is the mandatory life term, and that's what Alex Owens sentenced Nicky McConnell to. But I think it's worth noting and worth talking about, obviously, because I suppose this is the end of almost 10 years, 9 years of the brutal, bloody Kinahan Hutch feud. It's claimed 18 lives. And this was one of the early murders of that feud, wasn't it? The murder of Gareth Hutch. And you were telling me before we started the podcast that you actually went out to the scene, and it's one that you've never forgotten.
I was driving into work that day. I always remember it was a bank holiday, and I was driving in and I saw, you know, the paramedics or I think it may have been DFB, Dublin Fire Brigade, have a paramedic jeep, sort of, I think it was a 4-wheel drive thing, and it zoomed past me and I went, what's going on here? And within a couple of minutes, we got notification that there'd been a shooting, and we got to the scene. It was at Avondale House, there right in the centre of Dublin. And I've spoken about this before. One of the things I'll always remember from this, so we were there, I think by the time I got there, the ambulance had just left, but there was a significant Garda presence, and it's a built up area, and there was a significant amount of people out in the street, like hundreds of people. But what really struck me was the complete silence. It was oppressive. It was eerie, really. You would expect the opposite. You'd expect pandemonium and people screaming and roaring. Deathly silence. And that is one of the things that has always stuck with me. And one of the things I remember about the murder was that Mr. Hutch was trying to get moved. I think didn't he speak to the local councillor?
Yeah, Councillor Neil Ring, had actually told us that Gareth Hutch had been in with him the day before, had expressed fears for his life and wanted to be relocated, that he didn't want to live in Avondale House because he believed his life was under threat. Now, like, you have to remember the atmosphere that there was at that time. Like, it's hard to imagine now, but basically from the 5th of February anyway, although the feud really started in September 2015, but certainly since the Regency, the Kinahans were going after anyone with the Hutch surname associated with the Hutch family, anyone they considered to be in any way they believed connected to the Regency Hotel. And Gareth Hutch was one of those targets, and he certainly knew that. Now, he also had, I suppose, a bit of a warning and a kind of internal dispute going on as well, that married up with that feud, so to speak, and interests aligned. And I think certain forces realized we can have this guy murdered, and we can basically be helping out the Kinahans effectively. So Jonathan Keogh, obviously, he's already been jailed for the murder, and he is the man who actually fired the fatal shots into Gareth Hutch. Gareth Hutch was getting into his car at the time when those two gunmen came up behind him and shot him in the head. And we know about this detail in excruciating detail, partially because we actually saw it. The footage leaked of CCTV footage of the actual murder, the moment the gunman comes up and shoots him in the head just as he's poking the head into the car door. It's horrendous to watch, but sadly it was quite widespread, and the family have even seen it. But Nicky McConnell was that second gunman, and that's a name we knew of for a long, long time. Because Gardaí almost immediately identified him as a suspect in the case. But it was a long time before they got him. They had to ultimately extradite him from Turkey, and they did, and he fought that extradition, and he was brought back. And after delay after delay after delay, the three-judge special criminal court found, on the basis of the evidence presented, that he was guilty of the murder by common design, because obviously he didn't fire those shots, but he was also carrying a gun with the safety on, albeit, and he was there to kill Gareth Hutch. That was his mission, and he was helping Jonathan Keogh to do that, driving the car up and staking him out in the house, along with Jonathan Keogh's sister Regina Keogh, who provided that house for them to basically scope him out, and she was jailed for the murder as well. So it's a long time coming for the Hutch family, and I know that they breathed a sigh of relief there on Monday when they finally saw Nicky McConnell locked up for that murder.
And you were in court for that, Paul. Vera Hutch, Mr. Hutch's mother, she made some comments afterwards. I thought she spoke very well, actually, and it showed the real. We sometimes look at a story, at a murder, and go, right, you move on to the next one. But every murder, well, it's a shattered life, isn't it, really? So yeah. What did she have to say for herself?
Well, I mean, I've spoken to Vera before when a number of other individuals were sentenced, and she has always kind of said, I suppose, the same thing, that their lives have not, I mean, you can understand that their lives have not been the same since the murder of her son, that they have, she feels effectively that she has lived her life as a shell of herself. She's not the same person ever since. And she spoke outside the court and just said that she felt that justice had finally been done, and they were able to move on with their lives now that it's all over. She was quite emotional and upset. She's done an interview since with RT Primetime, and it was a very in-depth and very good interview with Miriam O'Callaghan, where she spoke about I suppose, the larger impact on her and her family. And it was fascinating to listen to, because obviously they were targets too. Her own husband, Johnny Hutch, who ultimately passed away in, I think, 2019. He fell down the stairs and sadly died. He was targeted twice, but in one particular incident, a gunman came out of a car and chased him into the side of his property and around the back of his property. And she spoke about that in great detail, talking about how she was cowering for her own life, believing that her husband had already been shot dead, because she saw this gunman come in after him. She thought that Johnny was dead, and she was also thinking of her disabled daughter, who was in the back garden and who was ultimately shielded by another daughter who jumped on top of her. But she believed that she was dead as well. So it shows you just what they've gone through. Obviously, that gunman was unsuccessful, thankfully, Michael Carroll, and he was ultimately jailed for it. But it shows you that the Kinahans were ruthless, in that they went after these family members, whether they were involved or not. So they've lived a horrific, hellish life, and this is the end of that now.
And when you're in the midst of these things, reporting, you don't really have time to take stock and stop. One of the things I remember from this whole feud, I would say it started in 2014 when they tried to kill Daniel Kinahan. So August 2014 when they got the innocent boxer. But say from 2014, the last murder was in January 2018. That was a very, very strong 4-year period. One of the things I remember, at one of the Hutch funerals, do you remember a family member stood up and said, "We're not a cartel, we're a family."
Yes.
And the family has suffered. I think it was the funeral of Derek Coakley Hutch, I think. That family has suffered a huge amount. The Kinahans really went after them.
They did. And I mean, there'll be people that'll listen to this and be quite cynical and think, look, it's a feud and there were criminal sides involved. Certainly there is a criminal element to, there is a Hutch criminal organization that's been identified by Gardaí, of which there are members that they believe are involved in organised crime. Let's be clear, Vera Hutch and her daughters are not involved in organised crime, but they lived a horrific, hellish life because of the fact that they bear that Hutch name. Now, they're proud of that name. They say it gets a second look when people hear it, but they're proud of that Hutch name and they've no reason to hide away from it. But, I mean, even the daughters have told me before how their own cars were set on fire, how their own lives were under threat, how there was a Garda post outside their father and mother's house for several years. Remember the Garda post that was outside their uncle Patsy Hutch's home as well, 24-hour post, I mean, that shows you the kind of life living in fear kind of existence they had. They would tell you now that they believe and they hope that the feud, as it were, is over. And this, in a way, was a kind of a symbolic ending to that because Nicky McConnell's the last person to kind of get done for this murder. And it's one of the successes for Gardaí, isn't it, in this feud, that they managed to track down and lock up every perpetrator involved in this, be it Regina Keogh just providing the house, Jonathan Keogh actually firing the shots, and then Nicky McConnell as well. They chased him and they got him all the way out in Turkey, and they managed to extradite him. And I think that they would view that as a success, and certainly a very strong statement from Detective Superintendent Colin Murphy as well outside the court. That they effectively, criminals have nowhere to hide, that they will go after them wherever they are.
And what's really interesting? Colin Murphy and his team, I think, deserve huge credit for this. At one stage, I remember exactly which murder it was. Michael Barr, I know we've spoken to his sister. That murder was in what's called the U. So U district, Mountjoy and Fitzgibbon Street. That was in that area. But they had other murders. So the Bridewell Gardaí, what's called the D, had to take over that murder because there was, now this was 2016. And what's really interesting is they got all the 4 killers for Mr. Hutch. They got all 3 killers for Michael Barr. So they have caught 2 entire murder teams. And I think that's testament to their police work because they were horrendous times for the families, for the people of North Inner City, Dublin, and for the Gardaí because it was extremely stressful. And I think they deserve great credit. So you're right, Paul, up to 18 murders attributed to this feud. 4 have seen people jailed for life. So that means there are 14 still open.
Yep. It doesn't mean it's over.
Oh, no, well, we all have our views on that, but gangland murders are really, really difficult to solve. And I think the team from the North Central really did a fantastic job hunting down all these killers.
They have to be commended. And, they would say their investigation isn't over in terms of going after individuals involved believed to be involved in other murders. Obviously, we think of the murder of Eddie Hutch. There are people wanted over that, including Daniel Kinahan himself. And Gardaí would be hopeful that this file from the DPP ultimately yields convictions in that. I just want to briefly talk about Nicky McConnell because I find him a fascinating character. I mean, he is a ruthless criminal. We heard in court on Monday that he has 105 previous convictions. So he was certainly well known to Gardaí. He's convictions for assault, misuse of drugs, threatening to kill, cause serious harm, possession of knives, public order offences and multiple different road traffic offences. So he certainly has lived a life of crime. But I'm not saying I didn't feel sorry for him. Don't get me wrong when I say this. I did not feel sorry for him. But I was looking at a man there sitting in the dock who I would say was a relatively young man. and in very good shape. Clearly, he keeps in shape in prison, and you know he's a fit young man who is now going to spend look at least 30 years in prison, if not more. He's thrown his life away. He had absolutely no support in court, from what I could see. No family, no friends. What a miserable existence for someone who signed up to do the cartel's dirty work. Really, it's kind of it's a sad end to a person's life.
What was his demeanour in court? I think people might be interested in this because it always interests me.
Totally stone faced and just, no reaction to anything. I suppose he would have on Monday that he was going to be handed down the mandatory life sentence, but I even recall being there in court a previous day. I mean, there's no reaction out of him whatsoever. I mean, I think he's resigned to his fate. I don't know if they say, when you watch these gangland shows, that people are almost ready to take the rap, like they've like, well, if I get hit, I get hit. And, I don't know if it's quite like that. Your family will be looked after and you go and do the time. But you wouldn't get any kind of read from him, from his body language at all in court on Monday.
I'm always surprised that not many people react when they are jailed. I can think of, do you remember your fella who said 4 World Cups when he got 20 years?
Oh, yeah.
One of the Kinahan heads, it was I can't remember which one it was. I don't want to get it wrong, but it was a would-be hitman and he got 20 years. Remember he said, no problem, 4 years.
I think that was Caelan Smith.
I think it was, yeah. Most of them, they say nothing. The next 20 years of their life, 30 years of their life are gone. And I'm not saying it's not a bother, but you would think that they might go, I'm not allowed to curse. They might just throw the head. I've very rarely seen that.
Yeah. I'm thinking just also, I want to mention briefly Vera Hutch's victim impact statement, because she spoke, one of the things that kind of, I'm just remembering now that it was very, a poignant fact of the whole thing. It was Gareth Hutch's young child, Preston, and that he has to grow up without a father. But she mentioned that Preston often asks her, "When's Daddy coming home?" That's the harsh reality of this. And I would also just point out her final message on primetime, that she said, "Don't get involved." So she had a message to people, just to stay out of that life, of crime. And I hope people do heed it. They might say, "Oh, that's rich of a Hutch to say that," but look, she's an innocent Hutch family member caught up in this. You can see the ramifications of getting yourself involved in gangland crime, and this is it. You've got a son without a father, and a family completely destroyed. So
do you think it's fair to say that most people in gangland violence tend to get sucked into it rather than proactively going, "I'm going to be a gangster"?
I think so. I mean, we talk now about some people that are wannabe gangsters. That I know we often speak about Mr. Flashy, for example. Now, that's not to say that he isn't a serious organized criminal. Obviously, he got involved in some serious heavy stuff. But I think he's of a young generation that see, the flashy gear and all this as it's cool, But I think the vast majority fall into that life because of the circumstances that they're in. I mean, if you can imagine growing up in the North Inner City, and especially if you already grow up in a family that is already involved in it, it's almost second nature that you end up in that life. And I think there would be a lot of sympathy, even among members of An Garda Síochána, for young people who end up in that life, and they're trying to deter them from it at an early stage. Because you see these, kids as young as 8 or 9 dealing drugs in the inner city, and you don't have to be a professional. You don't have to be a photographer hiding in a car or a surveillance guard to go out into the inner city and spot these young kids openly dealing drugs. It's there for everybody to see. So it starts at an early age. They've no chance. It's sad.
I would agree with you, but I can think of one person who I would consider as an exception to the rule, someone who proactively went for it, because he came from a decent family and the family hadn't been involved, Eamon Dunn, and he became a really serious gangster. And he seems to have chosen that life, proactively chosen it. And I think he is the exception that proves the rule, I'll be honest.
I suppose there's a psychopath for every generation, isn't there? And certainly there are a few in gangland, and probably a good segue when we're talking about psychopaths. Fat Freddie Thompson, a notorious criminal and member of the Kinahan cartel, who is serving life for murder, the murder of Daithí Douglas, a murder that he effectively orchestrated on behalf of the Kinahan cartel. But again, another sad reality of life. It's a case of like father, like son, isn't it? And when we finally got the conclusion of a long ongoing case in relation to Bradley Dempsey, the son of Freddie Thompson, yesterday.
Yeah, he on Tuesday he got 8 years at the Dublin Circuit Criminal Court. I was sort of I think it was 5 shots he discharged into a car in Dublin 8 in January 2022. 8 years is a bit of a hefty sentence. I'm not saying he didn't deserve it. I'm just saying I was expecting probably 5 years, something like that. Did you not think it was? I'm not condoning it either way. When I read 8 years, I went, oh, that's a bit. It's not what I was expecting.
I wonder is it the aggravating factors of it, and maybe the previous convictions that didn't help him, and possibly the association. Although I don't think that had anything to do with his case. It wouldn't have come into it, but.
Yeah, and look, I was just looking back at our old stuff. Sometimes because of Ireland's defamation laws, there's lots of things we can't write. And I remember looking back there in the story I did in January 2022 when it happened, all we could say was an associate of Freddie Thompson. Yeah. But we did talk about how he fired shots. It happened at 11:30 or 20 to 12 in the morning, like during the day. And he fired at a car, and his blood was up because it was in relation to an assault that had happened about an hour earlier on an associate, and there was evidence about him ringing somebody and saying, "Get me a lock," and all that sort of stuff. So, there was definitely malice of forethought. It wasn't something that had happened within a couple of minutes. So he went for it. So he does have convictions. I think public disorder and some producing an article and other convictions. But 8 years. So he'll serve 6.
Yep, if he's of good behaviour, that is.
Yeah, no, he has been in custody since, I think he went into custody in January 2023. So that's 2 years off already. So 6 years. So, yeah, another 4 years probably.
I'm just seeing it. Look, just reading the facts of what was heard in court. I mean, it's saying the facts that were heard in court were that he was apparently assaulted. An associate of Bradley Dempsey was assaulted near the scene. So that's the incident that preceded him to then shoot the shots at the car. But it's, that gut reaction in him, the fact that he had a weapon in the first place, tells you that he is already of a violent nature, isn't he?
And look, I don't want people thinking I'm diminishing. I'm just saying I was surprised by the 8 years, but it must have been a terrifying. There was a driver there, and one shot went through the windscreen and others went through the body of the car. Imagine being shot at. He actually, I think, reading it, he said he first of all, he thought it was kids letting off firecrackers. And then he realised, and I think he obviously got really, really upset. It must have been a terrifying ordeal, and it happening in broad daylight. So things like this, I remember going to a house, I think it was Meath somewhere years ago, 10 years ago, and the house had been shot up just with a pistol, a 9mm, maybe a Glock, something like that. And I remember looking at it, and the bullet hole was visible in the window, in the front window, but it went all the way through the house. One bullet, so God knows where those bullets could have gone. You discharge a firearm like that in a built-up area like Dublin 8, and you're dicing with death.
Someone could have been killed, 100%. I want to just mention a letter that was handed into court by Bradley's mother, Victoria Dempsey. Vicky Dempsey, people might be familiar with, the former partner of Freddie Thompson. And I just find it interesting that she said that she's got a lot of guilt in relation to what she said was her son's very difficult childhood. And there's an expression of remorse as well. So certainly his mother feels an element of guilt for the childhood that he had. I mean, look, Freddie Thompson's in jail now, serving a life sentence, but no doubt, he lived a life of crime.
We mentioned about 10 people serving, 9 of them are serving life sentences, one is serving a 22-year sentence for murder, but 10 people are in prison for Kinahan murders, and Freddie Thompson is one of them. And it's really been remarkable, I think, the investigation that they have. There's something like 70 people who have been hit with jail terms in Ireland, Britain and Spain as part of the real massive Garda crackdown on the Kinahan cartel. And I think we will look back, it's 9 years next week, the 9th year anniversary of the Regency. next
Wow.
next month.
It's hard to imagine it.
Time flies. I still remember it like it was yesterday. But really, more than 70 people locked up, and the guards were on the back foot. Really were for a year or two. But then something happened. They will say that they got more money. I know. Remember, the government gave them extra funding. I think it was 5 million quid straight away the week after the Regency, and that meant more overtime and more resources. And they turned that worm really, really big time against them.
Yeah, and we certainly saw the fruits of that this week. It's funny in a way, like a lot of what's happened in the court this week is a bookend to a very long period of time that we've been writing about. That I think we're kind of at the end of now. I don't think we're going to be writing about the Kinahan Hutch feud quite as much unless there is a new chapter to that, which is maybe the Kinahans coming home, or if God forbid the feud escalates again. But that period, that from 2016 or 2015 on, seems to be thankfully at an end. And this final sentencing of Nicky McConnell is hopefully a bookend for that. And yeah, we'll see what happens next in terms of any future court cases. But yeah, it's mad, isn't it? How we're nearly 10 years on and we're talking about it still.
And we will talk about Kinahan in part 2 of this pod, because there's a bit to talk about.
There certainly is. Okay, we'll leave it there. So
thanks, everybody.
Today, thank you very much.